with this scene from Batman Begins. As you can see, young Bruce just sees that his parents have died. This is one of the things that leads him to become Batman. But imagine a different world. Instead of the robber killing his parents, what if Bruce Wayne does? There's no Batman, right? Not likely. Thomas Wayne becomes Batman, avenging all crimes, trying to avenge his son too. And Mrs. Wayne, Martha Wayne, becomes so deranged, so clinically insane, that she loses it. I mean, losing a child would do that to you. And that is what the comic book Flashpoint is. Mr. Wayne is Batman, and Martha Wayne is the Joker. Now, if you see it that way, the Batman and Joker dynamic makes more sense. You know, they're always going after each other, but never killing each other. So, okay. Oh. Nice. Let me get that real fast. So, today, I want to give you a brief outlook on the world of comics. I will do that by showing you a little bit of history, a little bit of the publishers and main characters, and I will give you some methods of obtaining your own comic books. Okay, Jamie Trecker of the Antiques and Collecting magazine wrote, "Born at the turn of the century as a magazine reprints, comics burst into its heyday in the Depression era and was one of the iconic symbols of World War II. As you can see in comic book strips, if you read newspapers, there's little comic books. That's how the comic books nowadays you see started as. A lot of the superheroes like Superman, Captain America started because they wanted to uplift young boys. That's why Captain America is so popular here, but it's not popular in Europe, as you can see. There's different ages in the comic book era. TV Trope has it as the golden, the silver, the bronze, the dark, the iron, and the modern. Recently, right now, we're in the modern. It's from the 1980s and present. All these eras have to do with like different things, as different stylings or the depth of the character. When Mary Jane died, that turned into a new one. So now that we know some of the history, I want to give you some of the publishers. Okay, the two major publishers that you guys probably all know is DC and Marvel. Random History's website has it as DC's official name for 50 years was the National Periodic Publication, and then it turned into Detective Comics. Now they just shortened it into DC. Okay, and Marvel was known as the Timely Comics from 1939 to 1950. Then it was to Atlas Comics from the 1950s, and now it's known as Marvel. I want to show you something. This is some of the Marvel logo. As you can see, they have Spider-Man, they have the Avengers, they have all these other comic book heroes that you don't even know. So, I mean, there could be one for you. Then we have DC. You have the Justice League of America, which is Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. You have Arrow. You have Aquaman. They cut him off, but Aquaman. You also even have Watchmen. That was a comic book before it was a movie, guys. Okay, but don't forget about the little guys too. I mean, I guess a lot of you have seen The Walking Dead, right? Did you guys know it was a comic book?
Yes.
Or some of you guys don't know. But it was done by Image Comics. You can't see it right there, but comic book. It's been going on for a decade, actually. Rick Engel is a member of a stock pricing team that sees future of small brands. Got interviewed, and I like this quote that he said. "I think an increasing number of people are starting to realize this. The Walking Dead is a comic book. It's 10 years old now, and it has close to 120 issues now. 115 as of last week, so you can start catching up." Then you have a personal favorite of mine, Kick-Ass. He was also in the movie. They first did the book and then the movie, and then everyone's little badass big girl. She recently got into her own comic book too. Okay, now that you know some publishers, I want to give you some way of obtaining some of these comic books. Okay, Jeffrey Wilson of PC Magazine recently wrote, "Digital comics are comics that are digital comics. It's a surprisingly broad umbrella that covers digital versions of print titles, digital books that don't have like a book to show, and then Also webcomics. You can read digital comics on a tablet, smartphone, or PC. And there's now apps that are just dedicated, so you don't have to get the Marvel dedicated app to get it. So that's one way, digital comics. Then you have comic book shops. Comic book shops recently opened up in the 1960s. David Serche of the Comic Book Collectors wrote, "The first pure comic book shop, in the sense that comics were the first main merchandise, was the Seven Sons comic book, which opened in San Jose in April 1st of 1968. So that's another method. There's digital, there's comic book shops, and you could also buy it personally. So if you want to buy, say, Carnage, then you can go to Marvel, the website, most likely, because unless if you know one of their reps, you go to the website and you can personally buy for them. They will send it to you on that day, so you never miss it. Also, Serche wrote that in direct subscription, the collector, say me, buys the comics from the publisher. So that's a way. And I wanted to show you. There's the comic book, the one that I have right here. As you can see right here in the corner is this digital edition. So you could go inside the book right here, as I showed you right here, and you can't see it real good, but there's a code. So you go onto the website, you get it on there, and it's on there. So you could have it on your tablet. As simple as that. So now you can read your comic book on the go, and you can keep this one for collection, because you never know. This could be the next Action Comics #1. In conclusion, comic books have a rich history. They have various famous publishers and characters, and there's different methods of obtaining them. So why don't you get a book or open up your tablet and catch up? You have a lot to catch up on.
Encore.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to remind people who was supposed to be taking care of what. Tran is supposed to be doing the written evaluation, Jesse the oral evaluation. Jesse, what did you think?
I think he hit the major points of the history of comics and all his points really well. I like the fact that for the images he used for his presentation, he didn't keep them up as a distraction. He actually took them down to blank images or had a blank page when he was done talking about that certain subject. One thing I did notice that was bad about his thing was that he spent a lot of time reading his cards and looking down at them instead of looking up at the audience with small glimpses at the audience before going back down to a card. He had a lot of motion going with his hands and feet at the same time, moving around a lot, like he was a little bit nervous there. But overall, I think it was a pretty good speech.
Okay. Well, I like the visualization that you had at the beginning, your explanation of this kind of alternative version of Batman, for instance. If that's a storyline in a comic book, that needed to be a little bit clearer. It sounds like it probably is, as opposed to merely an explanation of how the two characters of Batman and the Joker could be visualized. So you're sharing something with us that I think is interesting and probably unique to people who are not comic book aficionados, and giving us a different way of looking at it. And I think that that's a good lead into the subject. Your focus stays pretty broad on this topic. It's a very basic introduction to the ideas and concepts. I think I might have enjoyed hearing a little bit more about the kinds of things that you were talking about there in the beginning of the speech, rather than simply the review of the two main comic book companies and their history. A little of that goes a long way, and it seems like there are much more interesting things to be talking about. You touch on a lot of issues. I just didn't think that they got as well developed as they could be. I did think, however, that you had very good supporting material. You're very consistent about citing research and adding to your speech, so that it's not just you geeking out on some comic book that you read, but you are instead sharing with us the opinions of people in the field, talking about events or incidents, and giving us good data on that material. It's pretty well organized. Like I said, it's a basic structure, and I thought that you did a pretty good job identifying and transitioning between the supporting points. To me, the one thing that jumps out immediately is a visualization. You mentioned the different eras of the comic books, and I just thought, well, why wouldn't that have been something that you could illustrate visually? There's a timeline, and you could maybe highlight some of the books, the comic books that made up the material during each of those eras, and you could maybe talk about how we knew each era was going, because it sounds to me like the modern era has lasted almost 45 years now, 35 years now, 33 years now, and that seems like a long time. I should be able to know that. You said 1980, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should know that. I got married that year. I've been married 33 years. So, it sounds to me like that's a big chunk of time out of, and you mentioned 5 other time periods, and I'm just wondering, well, if out of the 100 years, a third of it is this, what did those other time periods consist of? What was distinct about them, and what made this one unique? And I think that a little bit more along those lines would have been helpful. In fact, that might have been a good way to do the speech, just focusing on the changes and the evolution of the comic book industry in those time periods. I tell you what, I thought you had some nice visualizations of the characters that you showed us very quickly. We didn't linger over them. That was fine, because you're not really talking about the characters, which was okay. So that gets some good attention there, and it distinguishes the companies a little bit. The material about the different comic books that you got to in the end, including the digital versions, I like that. I just think that it needed to be expanded a little bit more, and I think it needed to be practiced a little bit more, because it just felt like it was coming in at the end, and that was you started talking about it earlier than when you were describing it later on, so it just felt a little disconnected there. Although I thought you did an okay job explaining it. I think maybe you could have thumbed through those pages on the tablet, for instance, or maybe even put it up on the document camera and showed us how it looks different than the hard copy or the paper copy. I don't know, you call it a hard copy of the comics. But I thought that it was all a good explanation of what's going on in the business now. Presentation is pretty solid. I think you do a good job trying to talk to the audience. You do look down a little bit, and sometimes there's a little bit of awkwardness. That's something that practice and rehearsal would fix. But it wasn't bad. It just needed to be a little bit more smooth. I thought you had a really nice summary and a good exit line. Another one of those things where if you'd practiced it once or twice more and had gotten just perfect, it would work really well. As it was, it worked well, but it just, I think you're undercutting yourself a little bit there. And when you watch it back, maybe you'll see what I'm talking about, or maybe you already know what I'm talking about. All right, thank you.